Star Wars 7x7 episode 2179. Today it's Father's Day, and we did an episode about the various types of mothers in Star Wars on Mother's Day, so I thought we would do something similar for Father's Day. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, when we talked about mothers on Mother's Day, I was able to identify 12 different types of mothers in Star Wars, and I thought, well, shucks, let's see if I can identify 12 different types of fathers in Star Wars, and I suppose that if I narrowed things down a little further, I could probably get there, but the honest to goodness truth is that there are fewer types of fathers in Star Wars than there are types of mothers in Star Wars. And for that matter, there are actually somehow, and surprisingly, fewer fathers in Star Wars, comparatively speaking, I believe. And, I say surprisingly because a lot of the Skywalker saga hinges on the father-son relationship between Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker. So yeah, how very odd. So let's run down some types of fathers that we encounter in Star Wars movies. For a start, there is the father who involves his child in his dangerous pursuits, right? So, for example, we have Jango Fett and Boba Fett, right? And then you also have Bail Organa and Leia Organa. There's another example. And to a degree, you even have Anakin and Luke, right? Because as Darth Vader, he is trying to get Luke Skywalker to join him and, fight against the Emperor and, rule the galaxy together as father and son, right? So there are a couple of examples of fathers involving their children in their own dangerous pursuits. Then you have fathers who are on the run because of some kind of danger and taking their kids into hiding. For example, you would have Galen Erso and Jyn Erso in that regard. You would also have Rey's father and Rey herself, naturally, and this is obviously not to exclude the mother in any of these situations. It's just that it being Father's Day, focused on that, and obviously Rey's mother and Jyn's mother were very much involved in those decisions as well. But we're talking about types of fathers, that's why I'm keeping the focus there. Then you have the absent fathers, if you will, fathers who are just not involved in their kids' lives. It's certainly implied that the fathers of Han Solo and Lando Calrissian, who we never see on screen, are not very well involved with their kids' lives and weren't for a significant period of time. Of course, Luke Skywalker seems to fall within this as well because his father was gone at a very early age, even though he had a father figure, which we'll get to that notion a little bit later. And sad as it is to say, it seems like Han Solo, to a degree, repeated the sins of his own father and was absent for Kylo Ren for much of his life. So there's that. And then you have Anakin Skywalker, whose father was really absent, as in non-existent, and it kind of raises the question, what did Anakin think about his parentage, right? I don't think anyone, has a story, and it's certainly not in a movie where he talks about his own ideas or what was shared with him by Shmi or anyone else about his Immaculate Conception. I haven't heard or read anything about that. So if there is a story out there about that, then by all means drop me a line and let me know about it. But don't get me wrong, there are examples of loving fathers in Star Wars, and in fact, there is some overlap, I think, in other categories. For example, I would say that Bail Organa was definitely a loving father to Leia Organa, right, even though he involved her in his dangerous pursuits. I would say that Galen Erso was a loving father to Jyn Erso, even though he was, falling into the category of being on the run because of dangerous stuff in which he had been involved. You also have the example, and it's one of those things where the character appears on screen ever so briefly in Revenge of the Sith, and there was a longer scene involved with him in Attack of the Clones that was deleted, but Rui Naberi, wow, pronunciation is fun. Rui Naberi, who is Padme's father, was also a loving and protective father. And then another example of a loving father, I would like to think, is Wicket W. Warwick, who we see briefly as a father at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. And lastly, we have the father figures, which are characters who were like fathers to their children, if you will, even if they weren't exactly their children. I would say that, yes, you can make an argument for, like, Bail Organa being that because he wasn't her real father, he was her adoptive father, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about situations like, for example, Anakin and Obi-Wan, right? Obi-Wan was a father figure in the eyes of Anakin Skywalker, even though actually Obi-Wan probably didn't think of it that way himself, and that was elaborated upon by Dave Filoni in one of the episodes of Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian, that we've talked about previously. That maybe he saw him as more like an annoying younger brother that he had to deal with for all intents and purposes. And the whole thing about Qui-Gon being the kind of father figure that Anakin needed and could have used, and it's unfortunate and part of the trajectory of Anakin's fall that he was denied that father figure in Qui-Gon. Another father figure who I think really kind of gets the short end of the stick in Star Wars is Uncle Owen Lars. He wasn't exactly a loving father figure per se, but he certainly did care about the welfare of his nephew and wanted to, ensure his safety and, thought carefully about who he was hanging out with and when, and tried to instill some form of discipline in him. And at the same time, even though, there was this clash about him going to the academy and, wanting to get him in, at the next opportunity and saying, no, I can't, afford to lose you now. I need you now. Like, you can go next time. Like, I don't get the idea that Owen was lying about that. I don't get the idea that he was saying this over and over again and then, pulling the rug out from under Luke's feet over and over again. I get the feeling that this was really, what he, ultimately wanted for the kid, and yet, also was trying to balance that with his concerns about who he knew Luke's father really was and is. To say nothing of the fact that he and his wife Beru basically signed a death sentence for themselves, and so they could kind of fall into the category of parents on the run, even though they weren't really exactly on the run in the same way. But I guess in the same way that the Ursos were not on the run, right? They were just, settled in hiding. But I mean, by taking little Luke in, they were basically signing a death sentence that if they were ever found, that was going to be the end of them. And they did it, even though, I mean, this is his, stepbrother's kid. Like, why should he care? But it seems like he was trying to do the right thing and trying to take care of him, even though, yeah, there are blind spots, I guess, that everyone has. But yeah, I feel like he deserves a little more credit than he usually gets. Anyway, so there you go. A rundown of different types of fathers in Star Wars in honor of Father's Day. And that is going to do it for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always. And if you are a father, I hope you have a wonderful celebration. If you have a father that is still around, I hope you're able to have a wonderful celebration with him. And if your father is no longer around, then I wish you much peace and comfort in this day. And I hope that father was a wonderful person, and I will say thank you on your behalf to whatever is listening in this universe. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.